Hi, I'm Jacob Hornberger, Libertarian candidate for president, and I'm on the road still on Sunday, March 10th. I'm heading on home to Virginia. Still got a couple hours to get home, and I'm kind of roll here with my political commentaries. And so I thought, now that I'm on a roll, I might as well stay on. I'm giving you post-debate commentaries on the Illinois convention and the Michigan convention, and specifically the debates that we participated in. And then I gave you a report on Super Tuesday, the primaries, and I invite you to watch or listen to those. But I want to comment on this COVID controversy that still apparently, people tell me, swirling on the internet, where the right-wing element in our party is saying, "Oh, Jacob's soft on the COVID criminals." And this all goes back to the Georgia debate, where one of the right-wing proponents in our party, a guy named Clint Russell, was saying, "Jacob, you're soft on the COVID criminals. You're disqualified from running for president," which is absolutely ludicrous. Like, who died and made him the determiner of who's qualified and not qualified to run for the LP presidential nomination? But the problem with these debate formats is, they give you 1 minute to respond, and then the light goes off, and man, heaven forbid that you go over the 1 minute, man. They come crashing down, and a lot of times the debate moderators will even interrupt you in the 1 minute, and so you don't really get 1 minute. And then they got to go to the other candidates to get their response. So when you're dealing with complex issues, this 1 minute format is just atrocious, because you can't really probe into what really needs to be done with respect to complex issues. And the COVID controversy is a complex issue. It involves multiple facets that cannot be addressed in this 60-second format. And so it's easy to say, "Oh, Jacob's he's soft on COVID crime," So I want to talk to you about it in one of these on-the-road commentaries, because it's easier to analyze when you've got more time to analyze what is really a very complex issue. And the right wing doesn't understand that. The right wing proponents in our party, they simplify things like this, and they don't think it through, that this is a complex issue, because you're dealing here with various facets. You're dealing with power, and then you're dealing with the criminal justice system, and there's various aspects of power in the criminal justice system that have to be analyzed. It cannot be done in 1 minute. That's what these guys don't understand. So let me begin with power, okay? When the Constitution was established, it brought into existence the federal government. We all know that. But what a lot of people don't understand is that it was a totally different type of government that had ever been called into existence. Throughout history, governments have just naturally been vested with what are called the traditional police powers. And if you Google police powers, you'll see what I'm talking about. Throughout the centuries, it's just that governments vested themselves, really, with these police powers. Now, what are the police powers? What do they mean by that? Well, there's 4 aspects to this: the health, safety, morals, and welfare of the people. Those are the 4 aspects of the police powers. Now, health is, okay, we're going to regulate, provide, control health. That's just been a natural assumption throughout the centuries, that it is the power of government to manage health, okay, manage the people's health, protect them on healthcare matters, or provide for healthcare matters. Safety is what we would all agree with as libertarians, those that believe in limited government, that government should protect us from murderers, rapists, thieves, and so forth. So no problem from my perspective from the safety aspect. Morals, okay, this is where laws like pornography, or gambling, or things like that, or fornication laws, or adultery laws, that they're protecting the morals of the people. Okay? And my position is that government has no business doing that. That you leave people free to make these decisions, whether you consider them sinful or immoral or whatever. That's what free will is all about. You leave that to the private decision making of the people. And then welfare. This is where the poor relief laws in Europe got established. The government's job is to provide poor relief to the poor, or anti-speculation laws against middlemen, and all these laws and rules and regulations that controlled economic activity, minimum wage laws and so forth, the laws for the welfare of the people, which of course I would oppose. Now, what the Constitution did was it called into existence a government that didn't have these police powers. It was a remarkable thing, shocking thing to the world. They said, well, this is not going to be a government of inherent powers. Because the American people would have never voted for it, in favor of it, and they'd been operating under the Articles of Confederation, which provided with a federal government that had virtually no powers, very weak powers, not even the power to tax, if you can believe that. They operated under a government for more than 10 years without the power to tax. And so the framers said, okay, this government will have its powers limited to those powers that are enumerated in the Constitution. And so people went along with the deal. But over time, in the 20th century, government acquired the powers the federal government to provide health care, Medicare, Medicaid, and to regulate health care. Totally illegitimate, because there's no power delegated to the federal government in the Constitution to provide for Medicare or Medicaid. But this was the legacy of the post-Franklin Roosevelt legacy of the FDA, the Centers for Disease Control. Okay, now I totally oppose this, and like in that Georgia debate, I said, as libertarians, we have to raise people's vision to what freedom is, and that's what I've done for more than 30 years, especially in the COVID crisis. To me, it's not enough to just oppose the fact that the government's over there advising people to take vaccines or forcing people to take vaccines in some instances. We've got to raise people's vision to the idea that government shouldn't be involved in this at all, one way or the other. That you've got to separate healthcare in the state entirely, both at the federal level and at the state level. Now, the state level was different with respect to power, because the Constitution said, under the 10th Amendment, the state shall have all the inherent powers that are inherent in governments throughout the centuries. The traditional police powers, health, safety, morals, and welfare, subject only to the state constitution and subject to any express restriction in the Constitution on state powers. Like, states were not permitted in the Constitution to make anything but gold and silver coins legal tender. They couldn't make paper money, in other words, under the Constitution. So that was an express provision. But if there was no express provision, states could do whatever they want. They could enact laws forcing people to go to church, because the First Amendment doesn't apply to the state governments. It applies only to the federal government until the 14th Amendment comes along. So my argument is, remove the power of government, both at the federal level and the state level, from involving this traditional police power of healthcare. In other words, separate healthcare in the state. Now, what do I mean by that? Well, if you take like the First Amendment, we don't worry about the government going over there and running state churches, or we don't have a ministry of churches where the government's passing laws that force people to attend church on Sunday or to send their children to church. There's no debate over all this stuff, because there's a separation of church and state with the First Amendment. And then through the 14th Amendment, the states are now prohibited from doing that too. Originally, before the 14th Amendment, the states could do that. They could force people to go to church, send their kids to church, just like with public schooling, subject to the state constitution. But a lot of states' constitution didn't limit that. And so until the 14th Amendment came along, the states were sovereign. Now, here's the thing about the right-wingers in the party. They believe in these police powers, both at the federal level, and I'm not saying all of them, but many of them believe in the police powers. They want state sovereignty. They call themselves the 10th Amendment movement and the sovereignty movement. They don't like the 14th Amendment. They hate the 14th Amendment. They want the state governments to be totally sovereign and have these police powers. And they believe, and many of them do, in the Centers for Disease Control, the FDA, and other healthcare agencies at the federal level as well as the state level. What they complain about is that the power's being abused. They want to get their people in public office. In other words, they complain about Fauci, but they just want Fauci fired. And you saw this in a lot of the commentaries from right-wingers. Fire Fauci, so that he could be replaced by a free market conservative, okay? Or maybe even a free market, liberty-leaning conservative libertarian that would manage these things and therefore advise people not to take the vaccine. Okay? Well, that is not freedom. When you vest government with power, you have to automatically assume, this is a basic precept of power, you have to automatically assume before you vest them with power that your worst enemy is going to get into that power. And if you can live with that, then you vest them with power. If you can't live with that, then don't vest them with that power. And that's what the separation of healthcare and state is all about. It doesn't vest government with power. And so the right-wingers, many of them, want the government to have this police power with respect to the health provisions and healthcare reform and healthcare powers at the state level, the traditional police powers, health, safety, morals, and welfare, and then just get the right people in public office so they don't abuse the power. They don't do the lockdowns. Okay, so there's your basic context here. Now let's talk about three aspects of the criminal justice system. We're talking about the abuse of power, first of all. And we're talking about abuse of power that does not constitute a criminal offense. Okay? A criminal offense is something that's on the books as a crime. So you can have abuse of power that is not a crime. The second category, you can have abuse of power that is a crime. So if somebody abuses that power, you can prosecute them and punish them for committing a crime at the same time. The third category is you can have abuse of power that is a crime, but where the public official cannot be prosecuted because he's immune under qualified or full immunity. So you have these three categories there with respect to the criminal justice system. Now what the right wing in our party believes is that when these officials abused power, let's say at the state level, they have the healthcare powers, which the right wing, many right wingers support, these traditional police powers, they ordered lockdowns. And so they say, these people need to be punished, or at the federal level, or even at the state level. If they advised taking the vaccine, they need to be criminally punished. They need to be incarcerated. And this is what they meant at the Georgia debate. Do you want to punish these people? Well, my response is, have they committed a criminal offense? And it goes right over their heads. They looked at me in befuddlement of, hey, what difference does that make? They prescribed, they advised a vaccine that brought about death. They did lockdowns that brought about destruction of businesses. Yes, that's right. But wait a minute, there's another inquiry here. Does this constitute a crime under our criminal justice system? Now, why is this important? Well, because in the Chinese criminal justice system, which a lot of these right-wingers support, right-wingers have always denigrated the Bill of Rights with respect to Fourth, Fifth, Sixth, and Eighth Amendments. These are the criminal justice protections: right of trial by jury, right to counsel, due process of law is one of them. It's not listed there, but due process of law is one of our fundamental precepts. It goes all the way back to Magna Carta in the year 2015. These are protections that stretch back into British history for centuries. They come into existence, including due process of law, as a result of resistance to British tyranny. These are tremendous protections, but the right wing has always denigrated them. If you go back to the 60s and 70s, they were saying that these were just nothing more than constitutional technicalities designed to let guilty people go free. But they're not. They're actual protections. So one of these precepts of our criminal justice system is, if there's an abuse of power that doesn't constitute a crime on the books, you can't punish a person. The Chinese criminal justice system is totally different. If a public official abuses power, mistreats citizens, insults citizens, or does something bad, that they send him to the gulag, or they send him to the jail. Because they've done something bad, they've abused power. But under our criminal justice system, just because somebody's abused power, if it's not on the books as a criminal offense, you can't do that. Now, many of the right-wing proponents here say, Jacob, that shouldn't matter. You should just be able to send them to jail. In fact, some of them there in that Georgia debate, one of them there on the stage, a right-winger, was saying, send them to Guantanamo Bay, which is very revealing, because it shows you that many right-wingers in this party support what goes on in Guantanamo Bay. They think it's fantastic. This is the national security state's torture center. This is where they torture people. And a lot of right-wingers believe in that torture. They made that real clear during the post 9/11 era. No problem with torture. No problem with indefinite detention. I mean, this is totally contrary to America's criminal justice system. But it's very consistent with the Chinese criminal justice system. They torture people there. They detain them for the rest of their lives without a trial, like what they're doing at Guantanamo Bay. But it also shows you that many of the right-wingers support the national security state form of governmental structure, which I totally oppose. I mean, I think this is the worst mistake America ever made. Much worse than the welfare state adoption, is converting the federal government from a limited government republic, which was what the Constitution called into existence, to a national security state, the Pentagon, the CIA, and the NSA. But the right wing needs the national security state because they support immigration controls and they want to seal the border. They want to finish the Berlin Wall down there. That's the military. The only way you're going to seal that border is a total militarization of the border, which is what North Korea does with its border. And that's what the right wing supports. And that's why they support the Pentagon, the CIA, the NSA, or even if they call for the dismantling of the CIA, they want to keep the Pentagon there to keep that militarization of the border and keep, this horrific torture and indefinite detention center at Guantanamo Bay. But even if they don't support Gitmo, they want to punish people for an abuse of power that doesn't constitute a criminal offense. And so let me give you an example of this. Suppose somebody on a local level spits on the sidewalk, and a policeman sees this and says, I'm going to arrest him. He could have COVID and he's spreading germs. And so they bring him to trial before the municipal judge. He's facing a $100 fine, maybe 30 days in jail. And they're asking for that. The judge give him 30 days in jail for spitting on the sidewalk. Well, the defense attorney says, Judge, I move to dismiss the charges here. The judge says, why? Because there's no criminal offense for spitting on the sidewalk. The right wing would say, doesn't matter. Punish him anyway, because spitting on the sidewalk is a bad thing. Well, but our criminal justice system says, no, there's got to be a crime on the books. You can pass a law right at that moment, get the city council to pass a law against spitting on the sidewalk, make it a $100 fine, 30 days in jail, but you can't do it ex post facto. After the fact, you can't punish this guy. Well, the right wing would say, no, if he's done something bad, punish him anyway. And that's what they were talking about with these advisors in the government that said, let's do lockdowns and let's advise people to take the vaccine. And so my question was there in that debate, well, is it a criminal offense? If it is, it's murder. They killed all these people with this vaccine. But is it a criminal offense on the books? And they were saying, doesn't matter. Send them to the gulag, send them to the penitentiary, but it does matter. It doesn't matter if you're in China. I mean, that's the system they favor. Send them to the gulag, even though it's not a criminal offense. Now, I haven't practiced law in many years, but I am almost certain there is no criminal offense on the books at the federal level against public officials that abuse power by advising people to take vaccines. There may be, and that's what I said. I said to Russell during the debate, if you have evidence that this is murder, and there's a law against this at the federal level, take it to a grand jury. And he just was befuddled. He was totally befuddled because in his mind, he doesn't think about grand juries, which of course are guaranteed by the Bill of Rights. He just says, no, if they advised taking the vaccine, just send them to jail anyway, or send them to Guantanamo Bay, or execute them, or whatever. You can't do that unless that abuse of power is a criminal offense. Let me, under our criminal justice system, let me give you another example. In New Mexico, the governor there recently imposed an emergency decree establishing gun control, where she said, nobody's going to be able to carry their gun, I think, into a public area or something like that. And it's just totally illegitimate abuse of power. She didn't even go to the legislature. She's like President Pinochet in Chile just issue a decree saying that I decree this under this emergency statute. Well, the gun rights advocates went into federal court and said, Judge, this violates the 14th Amendment, which incorporates the Second Amendment. And the judge threw out her decree immediately, rightfully so. Well, the right wing would say, no, that federal judge shouldn't do this. They say that state judge should be sovereign that state governor should be sovereign, that gun control decree should stand. She should be able to nullify what the federal judge did. I totally oppose that. I am really happy that that federal judge, enforced the 14th Amendment and through that gun control decree out. It's totally illegitimate. It's an abuse of power. Now, what about should that New Mexico governor be sent to jail? Well, some right-wingers might say that. They say, oh, well, she abused power. She issued a decree calling for gun control. Totally illegitimate abuse of power. But it's not a crime. You see, it's got to be a crime on the statute books before you can punish people for the crime for abusing power. Now, let me give you an example of that second category. Abuse of power that constitutes a crime. Iran-Contra, okay? Total abuse of power, but it also constituted a criminal offense. So that's why the people that were involved in Iran-Contra were being prosecuted for a criminal offense. Now, there's no problem with that because the statute is on the books, the criminal statute. They abuse power. It constitutes a criminal offense before they abuse the power, and so they're getting prosecuted. No problem there. Now, there's a third category of people who abuse power that constitutes a criminal offense, but they're immune. And a good example of that was when the CIA and the Pentagon and U.S. officials conspired to kidnap an innocent man, General Rene Schneider, the overall commander of the Chilean Armed Forces. In 1970, they wanted to overthrow or prevent the democratically elected president, Salvador Allende, the guy who had received a plurality of the votes, from assuming power. And Schneider was saying, no, that we're not going to participate in this coup. Our system of elections is that when somebody is elected, that we go through the constitutional process. And he said, I've taken an oath to support and defend our Constitution. So U.S. officials said, bull on that. So they conspired to have Chilean officials to kidnap, or Chilean people to kidnap this guy. And I believe also to kill him, because once you kidnap him, what are you going to do with him then? You can never return him. So some functionary is going to kill him and they're going to act shocked. But nonetheless, he gets killed in the kidnapping attempt. He got shot dead in the streets of Santiago, and under what's called the felony murder rule, the conspirators are responsible for the murder. And there's no question there was a conspiracy. I know some of you might think, oh, conspiracy theory, Jacob. But there are conspiracies that are real conspiracies. And the conspiracy to kidnap Schneider was a real conspiracy emanating from Washington, D.C. and Virginia, CIA headquarters at Langley. Well, so this is a criminal offense. This is felony murder. So they're clearly guilty of this offense, and they should have been prosecuted, but the courts hold that they're immune from prosecution, even though they've admittedly committed a criminal offense, because the courts have held that when it comes to national security, they have the prerogative to protect national security. It's a total cop-out by the courts, because there's nothing in the Constitution that gives them immunity for this, but the courts are scared of the national security state. How are they going to enforce their orders against the Pentagon and the CIA? So they've just made up this provision that if they're acting to protect national security, even if they commit murder, they're not going to interfere with it. So there's your third category of offenses. So you can see that this is a complex thing, and when they order lockdowns, every one of us would agree that that's a abuse of power. But is there a criminal offense of ordering a lockdown? Not that I know. I never heard of such a thing. But the right-wingers would say, Jacob, you got to punish him anyway. Criminally, you got to send them to Guantanamo Bay. You've got to send them to the Gulag. You got to execute them or whatever. No, absolutely not. If there's not a criminal offense on the books, you cannot do this. And this is what causes the right wing in our party to say, you're soft on crime, Jacob, you're soft on crime. But there's no criminal offense being committed here. So you can impeach him, you can remove him from power, you can enact a law that says in the future, anybody that orders a lockdown is guilty of a misdemeanor or a felony. But our criminal justice system does not permit people to be punished for abusing power that does not constitute a criminal offense. And this is what the right wing in our party and the right wing generally in America doesn't understand. They favor the Chinese system. If you abuse power, people should be punished criminally, even though there's no criminal offense on the books. So my position is, take away this power, and this is where the right wing opposes me. Remove power through the separation of healthcare in the state. They want to continue vesting state officials and federal officials, or many of them do. Some of them now are coming around to the separation of healthcare in the state. They're seeing what I'm saying. But many of them still want to keep government vested. They call it the sovereignty movement or the 10th Amendment movement, with these traditional police powers, and they just want to get the right people in public office. And then if the wrong people get in, they want to send them to the Gulag or Guantanamo and penitentiaries, even though they haven't committed a criminal offense. So the Libertarian Party needs to continue standing for the defense of our civil liberties. I mean, civil liberties are an essential part of a free society. Habeas corpus has been described as the linchpin of a free society. And the 4th, 5th, 6th, and 8th Amendments are barbed wire entanglements that protect us, that protect the innocent. I mean, there's an old adage in the law: better that 10 guilty people go free than one innocent person be convicted. Because it's so horrific, the notion that an innocent person's going to be convicted, that we're willing to let 10 guilty people go free because of these barbed wire entanglements in the 4th, 6th, and 8th Amendments that have come through the ages of resistance to British tyranny. We libertarians got to continue standing for the defense of civil liberties. And that's one of the real protections of a free society. So there's my analysis of the COVID controversy. Thank you all for tuning in. I'm Jacob Hornberger, Libertarian candidate for president. My campaign website is jacobforliberty.com.